Feminism disagrees with Western feminism over priorities. What is your priorities? Priority is not necessarily a priority. So if you have to go to my village and be preaching the whole question of intersection of whatever, class and all that, to a woman who hasn't even had any food to eat in the morning, it is really insurgency in futility. Finally, African feminism resists the exclusion of men from women's issues. On the contrary, it invites men as partners in problem solving. Not too long ago, a university in the United States, University of Kansas, in Wichita, they were using a couple of my books in their graduate gender studies class, and then we had a conference call. I had to participate in one of their classes. And when of course, they read my book that was dealing with these issues from an African woman's perspective. So then they started asking questions. One of the students I had said, because the issue of men here, she said, you know, the thing is, I'll be very uncomfortable in the class where if men were there and we're discussing women's issues. And I said, can you name one woman's issue? There was dead silence. And after a while, she said, well, something like abortion. And I said, who got the woman pregnant? You know? So we keep making these claims. These are human issues. So we keep clenching on them and alienate people that should be partners in solving them. So I will just wrap this up. So, if we have to do all this, if we have to theorize, if we have to do pedagogies that are not inimical to our environment, what do we need to do? We need to think of decolonizing and revitalizing our universities on the continent. People on the continent, Africa-based scholars and teachers, you have your job cut out, you have your work cut out for you. We in the diaspora, we also have our role. There has to be contact. There has to be collaboration from both sides. And I want to end with the diaspora. Now, as scholars and teachers, we must recognize that the importance of our teaching and research lies not only in what we teach and research, but also in how we teach and conduct our research. Our work assumes great significance when it arcs towards social change and social transformation. Our job is not just to hand out grades to students or to hand out degrees to students. Our goal should be to hand them the critical consciousness, clear-sightedness, and power to recognize, evaluate, and act upon their environment. Africa cannot afford the luxury of art for art's sake. We have to be thinking of the social utility of our scholarship. We have to be thinking of the social utility of our pedagogy. We should aim at training soldiers of social change. We must engage in the critical pedagogy that teaches education as freedom, the freedom that endows our students with the critical thinking that awakens critical consciousness and ultimately leads to critical engagement. How can we get out of the current impasse? First, questions about the production, dissemination, and absorption of knowledge must be addressed. As far as knowledge about Africa, our Africans goes, one must ask pertinent questions. Whose knowledge? Which knowledge? Knowledge for whom? Knowledge for what? Who constructs, produces, and disseminates knowledge? Indeed, in responding to some of these questions, African intellectuals abroad will come to realize that investment and involvement in the revitalization of intellectual life in Africa is not about altruism. We're not doing you a favor. It is about our survival, our own survival as intellectuals of relevance. In mapping a program for this revitalization, I propose the following plan of action. First, we have to reconfigure Africa. Let us get off this whole thing. If you go to the State Department website, what is Africa? Sub-Saharan Africa, decapitated Africa. Africa must be allowed to assume its full geographical meaning, and this means putting in place a program of action that will bring into the fold the entire Africa, from the Horn to the Cape, including the islands, Madagascar, Mauritius, and all that. The slicing of parts of Africa, of continent, Egypt, North Africa, the so-called Maghreb, it distorts knowledge production about the continent. And of course, it's another colonial, imperialistic narrative to decapitate Egypt. Because if they claim, yeah, they are Africans, how can you then explain that it was a void? There were things, no, there was no civilization. There were not all these things. It was a very imperialistic move. We should reverse that. Second, we should locate Africans. Where are they? How do many of us, some of you are on Facebook, you do all these things. Why don't we have a big database? Facebook, Africans, wherever you are, what you're doing. Somebody can get, in any country can set it up, followed with this big website, so that we know what people, you have LinkedIn and all these things, Can't we have one that is specifically for us to locate where we are? Because locating where we are is the first step in engagement. Third, we have to reimagine the university. We have to create full-funded, fully equipped, and independent centers of excellence that will be solely dedicated to research in African university. Not the type of universities that this present president of Nigeria is constructing. 2 years into his presidency, this man has created 12 universities. 12. Joke. Tell me, even the richest country in the world cannot do it. And not only saying it was created, he said, you always start within 1 year. And of course, they started 1 year. So we don't want glorified secondary schools and call them universities. We have to re-imagine universities in the other direction. Now, we also have to create professional and faculty development and mentorship opportunities, the type of issues that we have been discussing since I've been here. How do we create this faculty development that will also lead to the next one about sabbaticals, lectureship, conferences, and conferences in Africa? The premier Association for African Studies is a quarter of a century old. African Studies Association in the United States has not, for 1 year, held its conference in Africa. And you've had thousands of Africanists who have used Africa to build their careers. They've never been to this continent to have their conference. We also look at affiliations between individuals and between institutions, and of course, funding. Help each other, just even from that massive locating, we can also locate funding institutions that will put in touch with all people that are in a circuit. So these things have to be done, and they can be done. And they can all be done by bringing the energy and forces that are already there on the continent and linking those forces, bringing also what we have from abroad in order to have this synergy that will make the thing work. Professor Smith reminded me of my great uncle that I used to close one of my articles. And I promised him I will use it to close this also. On the eve of my departure for graduate studies in Obodo Oyibo is a land of white people, that's what they call it in my case. My great uncle called me into his private quarters, and sounded this note of caution. My daughter, he said, when you go to Obodo Oyibo, walk like the chameleon. According to my great uncle, the chameleon is an interesting animal to watch. As it walks, it keeps its head straight, but its eyes keep rolling in different directions. The chameleon does not deviate from its goal, but it grows wiser through the knowledge gleaned from the different perspectives it absorbs along the way. If the chameleon sees a prey, it doesn't jump on it immediately. First, it throws out its tongue. If nothing happens to its tongue, it moves ahead and grabs the prey. The chameleon is cautious. Western feminists are not when it comes to African women's matters. When the chameleon comes into a new environment, what does it do? It takes the color of the environment without taking over the environment. Unlike Western feminists who take over without taking on the color of the environment. The chameleon is adaptable, it is tolerant, and it is accommodating. Whatever we choose to call our feminism is totally our prerogative. However, in this journey that is feminist engagement, we need to walk like the chameleon, goal-oriented, cautious, adaptable, open to diverse views, tolerant, and accommodating. I leave you with these words of wisdom from my great uncle. Thank you.
Nnaemeka, for such a thought-provoking lecture. Most of us seated here, we have fed on the works of this great scholar. Some have read it with interest, some have read it with an AK-47, and as you may know, for most of our academic lives, we read the works of great scholars, we use them. Sometimes we use them to the point where you can actually compare their use to that of the Bible. But we never get a chance in our entire career to get to putting a face to the various books, the journal articles that we come across. But we here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the College of Humanities, we have been privileged this day to be able to put a face eventually to all her works. We are so privileged and we are grateful, Professor. We are so grateful. So I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. Yes.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I must identify myself as one of the chairperson of the Committee on Gender Equality of South Africa.
I'm not hearing here.
Can you speak up, please? Okay, I'm saying I'm the chairperson of the Commission of Gender Equality for South Africa, and I have just 2 questions. I'm not going to be the EFF. Professor, how do we harmonize the contradictions between the 2 types of them? I know there are so many types of feminisms, but we've categorized them as Western and African, and there are those that are different feminisms as well. So how do you harmonize the contradictions between the 2 types of feminisms to advance the struggle for gender equality? Because a woman is a woman. So I want us to come to that. The second one is, how do we take the struggle, all these feminists are talking about, to the ordinary woman, to my mother in the rural areas of Ndwai, who doesn't understand some of these issues, and how to make sure that men, for example, in South
Thank you. Very okay. Oh, yeah. No, I was a bit skeptical, I must be honest, when I was reading through Prof's, intimidating short bio, because I saw things like Rockefeller, United Nations, Carnegie, and of course I associated that with what I think she accurately characterized as, part and parcel of global white hegemony. And in my experience, at least, when one interacts with fellow Africans who have spent a considerable amount of time, whether studying or working in the global north, particularly for organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the UN, we tend to hear excuses for market fundamentalism, market fundamentalism, neoliberal, market fundamentalism and neoliberal capitalism. I am pleased. I think the presentation was very insightful. However, it seems to me that you have, whether consciously or subconsciously, chosen to stay clear from dealing with what I would characterize as the root cause when you talk about patriarchy, when you talk about sexism, when you talk about racism. I characterize those as consequences or symptoms of the major source of oppression, which in my view is capitalism, particularly in its modern day phase. So of course, patriarchy helps sustain capitalism, in the same way, homophobia and all these things. So
I'll start with your question. Those are 2 excellent questions and observations. I start with you as you said, when you have feminism that men don't show up, and why are you here? You showed up, huh? So, and in fact, the first question, you noted is extremely important. How do you harmonize? And in fact, that harmonization has been occurring in these stages. If you look at the history, I was saying expanding the boundaries. So it is really, in a way, harmonizing. Because what it didn't initially have in the 70s, more things were added. I always say that the women of color cast the first stone in this pool, on the feminist pool. It had its ripples. Then we came and threw ours. It expanded. So it is an important point because they are not just things we have to look at always functioning, and they are not connected. The feminist spirit connects all, but it is really in terms of modality